stood beside my new pride and joy. A slab-sided, gull-winged brute painted a cheerful, misleading blue. 12,000 pounds empty, 41 feet nose to tail, 33 feet of wing, 15 feet tall on her gear. Up front, a Pratt & Whitney R2, 800 radial grumbling 2,300 horses through a four-blade prop that looked big enough to mow a forest. I ran my palm along the cool belly skin and couldn't stop grinning. The bill of sale was signed, the funds sat in escrow, and the Corsair was mine. An F4U4, arguably the best American fighter to see combat in WWE, better than the Mustang. I'd say yes. Quicker, nimbler, heavier punch, carrier capable, and, crucially, honest near the stall. The P-51 could bite without warning, snap roll inverted, and eat 500 feet recovering. The Corsair announced its displeasure with a wing shutter while still above stall. Down in the weeds, no Mustang could hang with the Corsair slow turning. Rated for a ton of ordnance, the type was pushed well past that in wartime. Lindbergh himself once lugged 2,000-pound centerline and another 1,000 under each wing. A supposed fighter out hauling a B-17's per sortie average load. Believe it. This airframe had lived the whole arc combat late in the war, then Marines close air support in Korea. The previous owner had restored her to WEE fit, kill flags under the canopy included. He lifted the armament panels with a reverent flourish. Everything sat there, waiting bolt in 6.50s, feed the belts, and she'd be loud again. Losing his medical had broken his heart. Selling broke it twice. His wife looked like she'd been waiting for this day. We hung the wing tanks for the ferry leg and staged the rest of his parts for shipping. The tanks gave me the option of a single hop home, a long, long day. I climbed the ladder, dropped into the bucket, and took in the cockpit. Businesslike, cramped, perfect. Cowl flaps at 3/4, mags on prime mesh, then that deep, seismic cough into a rolling thunder that vibrated up the seat rails. Taxi out felt different already. This wasn't a Cessna, this was a war machine. Run up in the box. Temps and pressures steady, mags checked, prop cycled. Then a short roll to line up. Canopy closed. Final scan. Throttle forward to 2,700 revolutions per minute. The tail rose almost immediately. The nose settled. The runway began to blur. Then the Corsair did what it always seemed born to do and simply leapt, gear up. The gull wings bit clean air, and we climbed west. Best climb speed. 125 knots indicated. Had me at 8,000 feet in under 2 minutes. I eased the throttle, set mixture to auto lean, neutral blower, 29 inches manifold pressure, and watched her settle into a 227-knot cruise. At that hum like a sewing machine setting from the old training film. Though nothing about this round, oil-slinging brawler felt like a singer. She sipped 75 gallons an hour with the prop turning 675 revolutions per minute through the reduction gear. Flying a Corsair isn't point and go. You're always flying, tweaking cowl and intercooler, blower stages, mixture, prop, watching temps like a hawk. I loved it. It felt like piloting, not commuting with wings. The GPS, new glass grafted into old bones, showed 5 hours and change for the 162-mile hop. Weather was clear. The Rockies loomed a state ahead. The highest terrain along my line was 12,270 feet, an altitude you don't meet by accident. The Corsair's ceiling was 41,000, so the mountain problem wasn't power, it was planning. I'd also replaced the museum-piece oxygen bottle with a modern system. Old manuals talk about watching your fingernails for cyanosis. I prefer breathing. Climbing across the border, I bumped to high blower at 13,500, mixture to auto-rich, a kiss more manifold pressure, and leveled at 14,000. Mask on. The ride over the Rockies was a long mechanical bull session, lift and rotor slapping the airframe around for an hour. The desert plateaus beyond felt like a blessing. Long stretches of nothing leave room to think. Utah and Nevada slipped under me, long threads of road, a dust-bruised town here and there, a few stubborn trailers alone at the end of rutted tracks. I wondered about the lives inside. What debt to fate, or what freedom, made a person choose that horizon? Nevada's peculiar civility crossed my mind too. Sex work legal, so long as it stayed out past the last streetlight. Americans and our secret vices. We prefer them licensed in the dark. The Sierra rose at the far edge of the tawny desert. Tahoe flashed blue to my right. Yosemite's granite ramparts sat off the left. I promised myself a fast run down that valley one day, 400 knots and a grin I'd never get rid of. Mask off at 10,000. Sacramento ahead. Landing in a Corsair is a series of compromises you respect. Agility over stability. An engine so muscular that a greedy fist on the throttle can twist the airplane onto a wing. Carrier heritage helps. Low speed manners, a forgiving pre-stall buffet from the left panel. But the nose still hides half your world on final. I called approach, dropped the gear, eased out flaps, felt the controls cotton up a little, and kept the nose honest with rudder. Touched down further along the runway than my banker's plane ever did and rolled to the new hangar. Taller door for that skyscraper prop, space to spare for those big wings. Switches cold. Home. Friends drifted in, aviation is a small town, and circled the Corsair like pilgrims, hands on rivets, eyes wide. The old warbirds carry a gravity all their own, a romance you can't modernize away. A few Saturdays later, droning over Napa, a thought landed and wouldn't leave. This airplane could take me around the world. The math was tight. Those ocean legs would be long and lonely. The ferry tanks would have to go back on, and summer would be mandatory for weather. The longest hop I could chart was 1,606 nautical miles, Naka Shibetsu to Adak, and the Navy charts promised a 1,600-mile ferry range with an hour's fuel in hand. In hand becomes fiction over cold ocean with nowhere to divert, but the idea hooked me anyway. That night, the internet and I got acquainted. Visas, charts, hotels, contingencies. While winter had its way with the Pacific, I'd practice long legs, drill the Corsair until the flows ran on muscle memory, and prove the range numbers myself. One practical, slightly unhinged thought kept returning: guns. The restoration had left all the plumbing and mounts. The ATF paperwork was a bureaucratic maze, but collector status and 6 Browning .50s with a supply of belts eventually found their way into the wings. I'm not proud of it, but I did sneak out over Nevada now and then to exercise them. There are hills out there that didn't ask to be ventilated. Stay near but not in a military MOA, and the thunder gets blamed on the jets. Hop 1. Sacramento to Minneapolis. The planning took longer than the fantasy, but day 1 arrived. Kesak to KMSP, 1,316 nautical miles, 5 hours 47 minutes on the log. A band of 50-knot tailwind waited aloft. Another reason to go west to east. I'd be on oxygen most of the way for the Sierra and the Rockies. That was fine. Run up, then tabs set. Rudder 6 degrees right. Aileron 6 degrees right wing down, elevator 1 degree nose up. The Corsair wants that on takeoff. Torque is a living thing, and the prop wash will lift the tail if you let it, planting the nose where no wheels live. No flaps on a long runway. Cleared for takeoff. Throttle to military power. The airplane flew itself off, and I pointed the nose toward a perimeter I hoped to close. The desert slid into range land, then the Great Plains unrolled like a green quilt. I thought about the migrations, the land bridge hunters, then the later peoples, then my ancestors fleeing kings while creating new ones. 6 hours in the Corsair replaced 6 months by wagon. We call that progress, and for once the word fits. At approach, the wing tanks ran dry. The mains dipped below a quarter. You learn to trust your numbers where there are no gas stations. Minneapolis approach asked me 3 times to confirm type. Tower 2. A commercial crew finally cut in on frequency. World War II fighter. Give him room. They land like a pig. Not wrong. I waddled down final, kissed asphalt, and taxied into the GA Corral. Adrenaline bled off in the hotel. I'd planned to sample the nightlife. Instead, room service triumphed and I was asleep before the tray hit the door. 6 hours hand flying a tail dragger at altitude will take a dentist's drill to your spine. I tried to imagine doing it day after day in war and couldn't. Turned out rest was the right choice, though I didn't know why yet. Hop 2. Minneapolis to Toronto. Dawn, coffee, and cold prop metal. Wheels up before the commuter rush. Southeast to Canada. Counterintuitive until a map reminds you where Toronto sits. Wisconsin, the Upper Peninsula's shoulder of water, then a long glitter of Michigan, Huron, and Ontario sliding under the wings. At altitude you can see across, but the Great Lakes never stop looking like small seas. Somewhere over farm checkerboarded Wisconsin, I drifted into one of those cockpit monologues about science and the urge to bend facts until they kneel before belief, about social sciences that treat models like idols, about economic forecasts that miss 5 years running without consequence. A cockpit isn't a soapbox, so I put the thoughts away and checked temps and fuel. Toronto appeared between water and skyline. I'd planned a splurge, the Renaissance Hotel in the stadium with a room that literally looks out over the Blue Jays field. Game night. Floor-to-ceiling glass. I'd heard rumors about binoculars and exhibitionist fans, curtains optional depending on one's comfort with a captive audience. Canada's more adult approach to consenting adults had also factored into the itinerary. I'd arranged company in advance. Her name was Victoria, Danish ancestry, older than ingenue, which suited me fine. Experience trumps novelty more often than not. Legal markets curb the theater and the price. The exchange rate was another quiet blessing. I booked her for the whole evening, ballgame included. I scrubbed the day off, ordered a chilled white and a tray of small bites, and watched batting practice from my window. The field felt like a tin soldier diorama at that heightened distance. Peaceful, almost private. Victoria arrived between pregame and first pitch. The photos had not lied, and reality added a warmth the camera can't capture. "You're kidding," she said at the glass. "We're watching the game from here?" "Among other things," I said. "They can't see in." She looked doubtful, then shrugged into the playfulness of it. "Professional, but not icy." I offered wine. "To a beautiful woman," I said. A faint blush, a clink of glasses. The cash had already shifted the usual balance of certainty that always changes the mood in ways people don't talk about. My goal was simple: make the evening feel less like a transaction and more like an adventure we were sharing. I nodded toward the tray. "Hungry?" "Toronto." She set her glass down, crossed the room with a teasing smile, and pushed me gently back onto the bed. "We've got an hour before first pitch," she murmured. "Plenty of time for appetizers." What followed was not exactly room service. Curtains parted to the ballpark below. The stadium hum an odd soundtrack to a private, heady blur. When the game finally started, we were tangled in sheets, laughing at how the crowd roared at the same instant we did. We took breaks for actual appetizers and sips of chilled wine, then fell back into each other, unhurried now, playful, talking in between about cities, families, and why Canadians think Americans are spectacularly weird. By the 9th inning, the Yankees had their win, and I had a sore jaw from grinning. She picked a movie, surprise, something decidedly adult, and made sure the evening ended as enthusiastically as it began. At the door, she kissed my cheek and pressed a number into my palm. "Call me next time you're over center field," she said, and left me staring at the city lights. Gander Hop 3. I launched east under a high, cold sky, Lake Ontario, then the St. Lawrence, then the long green comb of Canada rolling out to the Atlantic. The ferry route was classic WE, Newfoundland, Greenland, Iceland. With GPS and satellite weather, my dead reckoning wasn't very dead, but I tried to imagine the pilots who'd flown this corridor with little more than a compass, a watch, and stubbornness. Gander was gray and drizzly. I fueled, logged the leg, and found a diner where 3 people asked about the airplane before I'd finished ordering coffee. Between Nanook reruns and a short walk in the mist, I called it early. Tomorrow was water, and water demands rest. Reykjavik Hop 4. Cold, dense air and 3 brimming drop tanks made for a short takeoff and a long stretch of horizon. 6 hours of ocean concentrates the mind. And the math. I checked range numbers so often it became a nervous tick. Halfway across, a white cliff of cloud swallowed the sun. The engine droned on, steady as a heartbeat. Greenland slid by to the north, ice stacked to the sky. Later, Iceland's mountains rose through breaks in the overcast, and ATC brought me straight into a carrier soft landing the struts made kinder than it looked. The hotel clerk circled a cafe on a tourist map. Inside, the barista could have been cut from a Reykjavik travel poster. Pale hair, glacial eyes, and a laugh that made the room warmer. "Lilja," she said, offering her name, then grinned when she learned I'd flown myself in. "Show me the plane," she demanded. then made me promise dinner after her shift. Her scooter turned the ride to the airport into a low-budget action film. At the hangar, she frowned at the Corsair's single seat like I'd betrayed her personally. I rented a Cessna from a wary club manager after a one-lap check ride, and 15 minutes later we were tracing steam plumes from volcanic vents, then skirting the edge of a white glacier. Fire and ice, side by side, and Lilja pressed to the window, breath fogging the plexiglass as she narrated every discovery in rapid Icelandic and English. We ate local fish and crisp beer. I drove the scooter back at a speed compatible with a long, full life. Upstairs, daylight still leaked around the blinds, but Iceland in summer ignores clocks. So did we. What began as a goodnight kiss didn't end for a very long time. Morning found her curled against me, then bossing me cheerfully into the best brunch in the city. One day became several. She borrowed a 4A4 and navigated us to places where the earth split and smoked, where moss fed on cooled lava, where light lingered late and people seemed to take that as permission to linger too. We laughed constantly. The hours between laughing were quiet in the best possible way. On our last evening, she lay with her head on my chest, tracing idle patterns. "This trip," she said softly, "around the world, it is yours." "It is," I admitted. Saying it made the promise to myself feel heavy and true. She nodded, smiled like the sun coming out. "Then you must go, and maybe you come back." At the airport, I tried to be brave and failed quickly. She hugged me hard, eyes bright but dry, and made it easy by not making it harder. "Fly," she said. "Finish." The Pratt & Whitney lit on the first press of the starter, and for once I wished it wouldn't. Dublin Hop 5. 800 miles, 3.5 hours, and a North Sea doing what the North Sea does, slapping the airplane around in short, cranky bursts. Ireland's green began as a rumor and resolved into a quilt that made the brown American West feel like a sepia photograph. I followed the WW2 ferry path and my own family's line of memory. Ancestry had painted Ireland in myth for me: oaks and saints and rebels and horses hauling courting couples down sun-washed lanes. The pub I found outside Dublin offered a different kind of catechism: a glowing television, talk of housing costs, pints that tasted fine but not magical. My postcard had a crease. I raised a glass anyway, to the Auld Sod, to emigres and returns, to ghosts that get kinder with distance. That night I filed the next flight plan, checked weather, and wrote "I'm coming back" in my notebook, underlined twice. Whether that meant Ireland or Iceland, I wasn't ready to decide. The engine would carry me forward in the morning either way. Government in action. The Senate gallery was a letdown from the first gavel tap. One senator drifted in, spoke to an empty chamber for 5 minutes, and vanished. Strom Thurmond appeared, delivered a few perfunctory lines, and left. Benson traded places with Proxmire, both men treating the dais like a revolving door. The next speaker read to 3 colleagues who were studying everything except him. At the 10-minute mark, Benson rapped his gavel. "Time," he said. The speaker lifted a phone book, thick stack of pages. "I move my remarks be entered into the record as read in full." Another bang of the gavel. A page sprinted off with the manuscript. It dawned on me the whole routine was theater, speeches for the congressional record, not for human ears. The real deals were elsewhere, behind doors that didn't have galleries. I left feeling slightly ill, and with a pinch of sympathy for whichever baseball players would be trotted in next to give certain congressmen their 15 seconds of cable news glory. Outside, Dublin looked like anywhere: ads, traffic, people in a hurry, just with cars on the other side of the road. A golden arch sealed it: America East. I bowed out early to the airport hotel, schedule back on track tomorrow. España. Hop 6. Disillusionment has a way of sharpening the alarm clock. I was taxiing at first light, pointed south for Madrid, 327 aloft, clear air most of the way. Controllers got tangled when I asked for a shallow, angled approach, then a senior voice cleared me in, curiosity winning out over confusion. A follow-me truck escorted me like a museum piece. After shutdown, a couple of guys circled the Corsair with respectful grins and radios crackling, then waved me on. The Prado was why Madrid was on my map. It didn't disappoint. Velázquez sparring with the viewer. Titian's unapologetic mythologies, the churchly loophole for undraped humanity. Goya everywhere. bridging classicism and romanticism, letting reason fall asleep long enough for monsters to crawl out. La Maja Desnuda still dared you to pretend it was anything but what it was. Later, I took a sidewalk table, a glass of red, and the city's evening parade. Spanish women don't so much walk as glide, sensual in the old sense, present, embodied, unhurried. Night folded into siesta and back into night again. I ate whatever the waiter swore by. Fish, olives, something black with squid ink, because when else would I? I turned in without chasing company. My head and heart were still somewhere north, where sunlight lasts too long and a girl rides a scooter like it stole her lunch. The Mediterranean. Hop 7. Out of Madrid into heat haze, then east to the pale plate of the Mediterranean. Iberia browned behind me. Italy's outline sharpened ahead. I thought about old empires and newer ones, Pyrrhic victories and quiet generals, and how often wars are won by refusing to give the battle your enemy wants. Naples came with harbor smell and a mountain brooding on the skyline. After tie down, I risked an Italian taxi, survived, and paid extra for the privilege of living. The National Archaeological Museum's secret room finally isn't secret. Pompeian life is blunt and bawdy in fresco and bronze, the past refusing our modern habit of blushing. I peeked at mosaics, paid proper homage to Alexander, and then surrendered to dinner, a bright, briny progression of small plates, a fisherman's stew, a cheap carafe that drank like a memory. Bed found me fast. The Golden Age. Hop 8. Naples to Athens is a blink in a corsair, down the boot, across a scatter of islands, into a city that once taught the world to think. I climbed the Acropolis because how could I not? The Parthenon glared white in the sun, wounded by history and carelessness, still managing to look eternal. The caryatids held their porch with unearthly poise. Golden ages are strange things, brief eruptions of excellence that seem obvious only after they're gone. Pericles, Plato, Phidias, later, Florence with its own pantheon, Paris in the Enlightenment, Philadelphia with its powdered wig revolutionaries. Do times make people, or people make times? Maybe it's both. Maybe it's lightning in a bottle and we spend centuries shaking empty glass. On the way back, I ordered flowers sent to a Reykjavik coffee shop. I'd forgotten to ask for a home address. Brilliant planning, pilot. Dinner was in a taverna that looked like a set from a movie, minus the pretty lighting. Locals made room, then made me dance. I obliged. Afterward, a woman with night dark hair and a laugh like open windows asked if I was having fun. I am now, I said, which was apparently the right answer. We walked, talked, ducked into a club pulsing with music. When a loudmouth mistook her for a target, my fist made a persuasive counterargument. We left before he had time to revise his thesis. She kissed me in a quiet street, then saw me to my hotel. What followed isn't for the record. Call it two consenting adults choosing a myth for an evening. By morning, she was gone, and I was left with a kind of memory that behaves like a postcard, brief, vivid, and impossible to prove. Tombs and temples. Hop 9. South over the Mediterranean and Europe thinned to islands and light. Crete fell behind. Africa rose ahead. Luxor was my waypoint and my excuse. Temples like stone forests, painted chambers meant to carry a life into the next one. 3,000 years of cultural continuity is hard to grasp until you stand inside it. Karnak's columns crowd the sky. In the Valley of the Kings, color still clings to the walls like the day it dried. The Egyptians didn't prepare to escape life. They prepared to extend it. Maybe that's how you persist, by refusing to imagine an elsewhere. Tour buses pulsed and departed. I ate in a place that served what it actually cooked and slept in a room that didn't promise more than it could keep. Burning sands. Hop 10. Climbing out of the Nile's green ribbon, the world became a tutorial in absence. Desert without end, the Red Sea a quick glint of relief, then more sand. It made me wonder why the three great monotheisms sprouted in such severity. Maybe harsh land invites a close-held God, one who touches the world directly, who parts seas and speaks from thorn bushes, who whispers lines that become books. Up here the Pratt and Whitney thrummed, gauges steady, horizon honest. Natural law doesn't care about human categories. Gravity is cruel to the man who falls and kind to the apple that feeds him. We call the same storm blessing, or curse depending on whether our field needs water or our roof needs mercy. Perhaps the desert, with its unforgiving clarity, insists we choose either a cosmos that follows rules we can learn, or a cosmos micromanaged by a hand we can't predict. Most of us, most days, live somewhere in between, flying on instruments, watching for weather, grateful that an engine can hum like a sewing machine, even when the sky looks biblical. I leveled, trimmed, and checked the numbers again. Fuel, course, time. The ordinary arithmetic of not becoming a cautionary tale. Somewhere ahead was another runway, and after that, another. And when the circle closed, I promised myself there'd be a return flight north, back to long light and a scooter that takes corners like a dare. Providence, sand, and reason. Maybe that's why desert peoples lean toward a god who steps in, a rescuer who can alter outcomes when the world turns hostile. Specific providence offers comfort when the horizon is nothing but heat and hazard. But the Enlightenment made a different bargain. If a perfect creator set the universe in motion, why would he keep tinkering with it? Either the machine works, or the maker blundered. A non-interventionist God, and a lawful cosmos, follows more cleanly from logic, even if it robs prayer of its lever. Strip away intervention, and scriptural visitations flatten into fables, ways ancient minds coped with floods, droughts, and the randomness of luck. The 18th century traded fear for physics and monsters for mathematics. Voltaire, more than anyone, dragged Europe toward tolerance, not because everyone agreed, but because disagreement stopped being a death sentence. Some corners of the world haven't had their Voltaire yet. From my cockpit, the peninsula below looked like an anvil of sun and stone, a place where certainty is easier to sell than nuance. Dubai layover. The Gulf appeared, blue glass rimmed in beige. Dubai cleared me in with a mix of curiosity and hospitality. The word Corsair sent a few controllers to the windows. Heat slammed the canopy when I cracked it. On the ground, the opulence was curated and air-conditioned, the workforce imported, the nightlife cosmopolitan and carefully cordoned from piety. The hotel bar was a small United Nations. Filipinos behind the counter, a Lebanese band, Russians in impossible heels, British tourists working on stories to tell later. A woman with a London lilt, Cecily, asked if I was alone and took the seat beside me. We ate small plates, shouted conversation over music, watched a Lebanese dancer make percussion out of muscle control. Not so hard, Cecily teased, and then proved her point upstairs. Half performance, half dare. We shared champagne, laughter, a kiss that sharpened everything, and later, the kind of intimacy I don't record in detail. Call it chemistry, mutual, unhurried, and entirely consensual. In the morning, she woke with a smile, threatened mock vengeance when I tweaked her sense of humor, and then grinned at the clock. Off to see the world? She said, already knowing the answer. We parted on good terms, her wit lingering, along with a single word, bloody. It sounded like approval. Piratical interlude, Hop 11. I launched before the heat could turn the runway to syrup, arced southeast and settled into ocean miles. The emergency frequency popped. Indonesian Queen, oiler out of Dubai, being pursued by pirates. Not a movie. Somalia had exported the word back into headlines. AWACS picked me up and vectored an intercept. The Navy had a destroyer 3 hours out. The tanker had minutes. I slid the sun behind me, armed the .50s, and came downhill. First pass along their deck, second into the superstructure. Unarmored steel and bravado don't fare well under concentrated .50 cal. Fire blossomed. The wake slackened. I climbed, checked fuel, and called it. Pursuit broken. The relief in the tanker's voice was physical. Mine came with a problem. My dash had burned margin. Navy couldn't put me into a hostile field. I asked for a deck. You can't land where we land, came the first reflex. This is a Corsair, I said. Hook equipped. She's done it before. A pause, then vectors. The carrier rose from the horizon, a moving postage stamp rimmed with spray. The landing signal officer talked me through the curving approach those old Royal Navy pilots perfected for long-nosed birds. Paddles dipped. I obeyed. Arms crossed. I chopped. The hook bit, my lungs forgot to. Then everything snapped backward and stopped. A swarm of deck crew folded the wings like praying hands. On the bridge, An admiral poured me something that wasn't officially aboard. I learned why nobody with jets had answered the tanker policy written far from saltwater. Assistance was allowed, action was not. A destroyer could loom, but aircraft couldn't engage. "You did what we wanted to do," the Keg said without quite saying it. I shrugged. They were gaining. The admiral's expression said the rest about Foggy Bottom. We traded a little history, Tripoli, Marines, the last time piracy met gunfire instead of memos. Keg turned to me. I was surprised to see a civilian craft with weapons. I met his look. Historical configuration, licensed, trained, and carried for remote area self-defense. I don't go looking for trouble, but sometimes trouble calls on guard frequency. He nodded. The captain, stone-faced, competent, thanked me for not putting a dent in his deck. Back to routine mostly. Fear sweat fades slower than engine heat. Down in the hangar, the Corsair looked small under modern steel, like a valedictorian from another century invited back to give a speech. I ran a hand along the fuselage and felt the hum still living in the metal. Then I started thinking like a pilot again: fuel, weather, next hop. Arabian blue waited beyond gray decks. The world was very large and, apparently, still occasionally old-fashioned. "I've got an ATF waiver," I said, trying a smile. The admiral blinked. "ATF? You work for the federal government? You know how the maze works," I shrugged. "Waiver lets me carry loaded weapons. Good thing today. Which brings me to a favor. Do you have any .50 cal I can buy?" "We might work something out," the EKEG said. "What do you fly? Navy?" "Didn't. First time on a carrier." "Christ," Bowman muttered. "Sorry, Admiral," I offered. "You didn't crash," he said, settling back. "Your bird carry anything else?" "Rockets and bombs in the original spec. 4s and 5s under the wings, 500s, even a centerline up to 2000. If I had the mounts and releases. I don't." "Laser guided," the CAG mused. "He's not hitting a maneuvering ship with dumb iron on his first drop." "Make that 0 chance," I said. They kicked around ideas. A drone to Lays, a Hawkeye to shepherd it, me to carry. I drew one line: no Navy jock takes my plane. "Wouldn't dream of it," the Admiral said, almost smiling. "My guys barely remember prop torque." He mentioned minor battle damage and we went to look. A chief had an access panel open and a flattened slug in his hand. 30 cal, he said, stopped by the cockpit floor armor. The Admiral stepped close, quietly. "Don't worry. A lot of us have been there." "You a river rat?" I asked. His eyes lit. "Yep," and scared every mission. They canvassed the airframe. Wings weren't practical for modern racks without a machine shop and time. Centerline? Maybe. No way to wire it into my original panel, but the chief could run a simple switch to energize the seeker and rig the safety like a drop tank. "Paint's coming off," the chief warned. "I'll put it back better than new after." I wasn't thrilled, but the intel brief that followed, Somalia, the pirate motherships, the pattern of attacks, made the case. If we were going to do this, we'd do it once, surgically. That afternoon, the ready room made me a curiosity. The civilian in a gull-wing antique who'd just made his first arrested landing and scared a pirate into quitting. The skipper broke the bigger news. The first pirate boat had blown up after my strafing. Fuel, ammo, bad luck, and open watertight doors. Not the plan, but it took a threat off the board. They shoved a tailhook certificate into my hands and gave me a call sign I didn't want to keep. Sleep was thin. In the morning, my Corsair wore fresh navy blue, markings ghosted out, a green GBU hanging where the drop tank had lived. The chief ran me through the turn-on, drop shallow, then pull brief twice. I taxied, launched into max wind, and droned south with too much time to think. The drone found the second pirate. I armed the seeker, felt the bomb begin to fly on its own wings, eased into a shallow dive, punched the release, and watched from the offset. The hit vented the middle hold. The blast overpressure did the rest. The ship broke, then fell in on itself. The freighter captain on guard only saw fireworks. The Hawkeye saw the whole story. I brought the Corsair back and caught the wire. The Admiral, the CAG, Bowman, handshakes, debrief, photos of a mast poking above a harbor by dawn. One more pirate hull remained, tied up and waiting. We'd try a dawn drop to avoid a night trap. They lit the deck for me like Christmas. I launched at 2:30, went dark 20 minutes short, and watched the harbor turn to geometry beneath the wings. The bomb's drag tugged. I released and turned out to sea. A flash, a delayed thunder, then radio. One aircraft climbing out. What kind? I asked. Likely an A-37. Ground attack. They vectored me. I didn't want the fight, and then I didn't have a choice. The bogey tried to climb through me. I used altitude, lined the pipper, and squeezed. A burst found something critical. 2 ejections punched free of flame. I banked hard, leveled at 12, and flew home into a rising sun. My first pass trapped nothing. Bolter. The LSO's gallows humor broke the tension, and the second try caught steel. Down in the hangar, the crew hummed the Lone Ranger theme. I told the chief, "Original paint today. I'm done." "Yes, sir," he said, already dispatching a runner. Upstairs, proofs arrived. The last pirate ship lying on the harbor floor, only the mast above water. The A-37, Intel said, belonged to a warlord, not any government. The admiral's look was the same one I'd seen on veterans in far older photos. "You'll think about this later. That's the price. It was necessary." "Tomorrow, Bombay," he said. In the morning, my Corsair wore fresh blue. And, beneath the old Japanese flags, 2 little pirate heads. "You've got to wear your kills," the chief said, and someone had lettered Lone Ranger on the cowling in cursive. I rolled at 200 feet past the island one last time and pretended I couldn't hear Bowman mutter. Bombay. The city in daylight was an ocean of motion. I found a hotel with plumbing that worked and promised myself a quiet layover. The cabbie offered introductions. I said I wasn't shopping. That evening in the hotel bar, I met Gita. Smart eyes, dry humor, English with music in it. We ate, talked about flying and families and what counted as normal in 2 very different worlds. She danced a little joke of a dance and laughed when I tried to mimic the steps. Later, in private, we kept it discreet and mutually respectful. I'll leave it at that. When we were resting, she mentioned a cousin about to enter the profession and, very matter of fact, asked if I wanted to be first. "No," I said, as gently as I could. "I don't want that." She studied me for a beat, then nodded, as if filing it under different customs, different lines. We talked instead about caste and cycles, and whether people change their world or themselves first. I tried to explain Jefferson and Thoreau and why patience and progress aren't the same word where I come from. She explained why, for some, they are. At the door she smiled. "Another dance lesson tomorrow?" "That," I said, "I can do." I ate early at the hotel and went upstairs. I lay on the bed thinking about the woman I was supposed to meet. In high school I'd been slow with girls. 3 brothers, 0 clue. The army taught me confidence, but by then most of the mystery had evaporated into ordinary life around base towns. A soft knock pulled me out of it. I smoothed my shirt and opened the door. Gita stood there with another woman, slight, shy, and young looking at first glance. "This is my cousin, Suchitra," Gita said. "Nice to meet you," I told her, then lowered my voice to Gita. "I only spend time with adults, and only if everyone's comfortable. How old is she?" "She's an adult," Gita said, a touch defensive. 22, new to this, and I thought you'd be kind." Even so, the uncertainty on Suchitra's face decided it for me. "I appreciate you coming by," I said gently. "But if she's unsure, let's not." Gita held my eyes, then nodded. She spoke to her cousin in their language. Suchitra gave a small, grateful smile. They excused themselves. When the door clicked shut, the room felt very quiet. Lines matter, especially when they cost you something to keep. I slept late, showered, and grabbed breakfast at the airport. Bombay to Madras would be a quick hop, 2.5 hours on the clock. The Corsair climbed into pale heat. India unrolled in quilted fields and scrub, bright rivers stitching it all together. I kept wondering whether progress is truth or just a comfortable story. Madras' approach was uneventful. I tied down for the ocean leg, surrendered the furnace of the afternoon to a nap, then chased dinner downstairs. The waiter insisted I try proper. Tamil dishes, dosa that shattered like glass, chutneys in traffic light colors, rice perfumed with cumin, and something I couldn't name. I waddled back to my room and set alarms. Hop 13, Madras, Phuket. 4 hours 53 on paper. Level at 7,500, mixture leaned, prop set for endurance. For a while it was the usual, zip into cloud, zip back into blue. Midway, the loose weather over the Andaman Sea knit into a serious front. I eased north to skirt the worst of it and redid the fuel math in my head. Then the rain hit. Hard, followed by a sudden wind shear drop that felt like an elevator with the cable cut. The Corsair punched back into smooth air with a teeth-rattling jolt. 40 minutes to go. I rode the bumps, sipped water, trusted the gauges. Sun again. The island slid into view. I called approach, got a straight in. 30 flaps, gear down, tailwheel locked for the crosswind. The mains thumped, the struts sighed, and I rolled out grinning at concrete that didn't move. By the time I finished the post-flight, a wall of rain marched over the field and hammered the palms flat. Lucky timing. A taxi ferried me to Patong. I took a cheaper hotel a few blocks inland. Ceilings are ceilings when your plans are indoors. Shower, nap, out at 8. The rain had rinsed everything clean. Air like wet linen, streets gleaming. I drifted through the swaz off Bangla Road and picked a roadside spot for a draft and sat-high. Tourist mild heat mercifully. The bars were neon kaleidoscopes. Music, sunburned travelers, locals laughing at all of us. One place got rowdy fast. I slipped away to a quieter room where a woman with careful hair and a black dress asked in tidy English if I was there to dance or just to sit. "Name's Meiji," she said, her voice like a song. "Walk?" I asked, tilting my head toward the quieter streets. She weighed me for a beat, then nodded. We left the neon for a lane that smelled of rain and jasmine. Back at my hotel we talked in shorthand, boundaries, safety, price, and kept everything simple and unhurried. Then the details fade to black. When the night was done, she squeezed my hand, took car fare and a tip, and told me where to find the best morning noodles. After she left, the room was very still. I set an alarm, listened to the last of the rain ticking on the eaves, and let sleep take me. Singapore slings. Hop 14. The hop out of Phuket rode a ribbon of heat along the narrowing Malay Peninsula. I tracked the spine of land south. Kuala Lumpur shimmered off the right wing, all glass and geometry. 2 hours later I was sweating through my shirt on approach to Singapore. Singapore is an island that turned its position into a fortune, naval hinge, trade artery, and cultural crossroads. 50,000 ships a year slip past here. The Strait of Malacca funnels a quarter of the world's oil. You hear a dozen languages in an hour: Chinese, Malay, Tamil, English, and a grab bag of everything else. I planned to eat my way through it. After tying down the Corsair, I cabbed into town and immediately looked lost enough that a man in a suit paused mid-phone call to ask if I needed help. "Amoy Street Food Center," I said. He pointed me 3 turns ahead, then added, "Get the nasi lemak, or soup tulang." Advice taken. Soup tulang wasn't soup so much as long simmered mutton bones, glove on one hand, straw in the other to draw the marrow. Nasi lemak arrived like a still life. Coconut rice, cucumber, anchovies, peanuts, a fried egg, crisp chicken, and sambal with a kick. Char kway teo, wok-kissed rice noodles with egg, fish cake, and cockles, finished me off. Singapore argues about food the way other cities argue about sports. The recommendations came non-stop and contradictory, all of them right. I made the pilgrimage to Raffles for a Singapore sling overpriced and not for me, and retreated to a gin and tonic. Heat plus food plus one and done cocktail equaled lights out by 2 in the afternoon. I dozed at the airport hotel and woke before dawn, strangely hungry, and launched at first light. Sunrise poured gold across the Strait of Karimata. It was one of those moments pilots try and fail to describe. Halfway to Bali, the GPS ticked from N to S and the compass swung lazy and sure. Equator crossed. Bali. Hop 15. The route ran over water but never far from land. Sumatra, then Java on my right, Borneo distant on the left. Volcanic green shouldered up into cloud. The surf lit the reefs in white. It felt like I'd flown into a movie backdrop. Bali gave me an easy landing, a sea breeze, and the sudden realization I was tired. I'd been moving daily since Iceland, not counting the carrier detour, which didn't exactly count as rest. I checked into a beach hotel, swapped the flight suit for a loud shirt and sandals, and practiced the difficult art of doing nothing. People watching, one fruity drink, a nap that became a full reset, dinner in an open-air restaurant with a cool evening breeze and the sound of the surf. The place sells romance by the yard. I was solo and still bought some. I woke with first light feeling human again. A quick stop. Hop 16. 2 hops in one day sounded reasonable with some rest in the bank. Pre-flight was clean. I planned the first leg low and slow to skip the oxygen and sightsee the lesser sundas. The ocean was ink blue. The islands wore hard green with a white stitch of surf. Komodo slid off the left wing. Childhood memories of monitor lizards the size of nightmares resurfaced, along with that story about a Hollywood type who learned, painfully, why you don't treat dragons like animatronics. From the air you can read the land like a ledger. Indonesia's forests have pressures written in the margins, cleared swaths bit into green in patterns I've seen back home after logging. The planet's old argument, conservation versus development, unspooled under the wing. It's easy to preach restraint after you've already spent your own inheritance. Darwin welcomed me with a G-day from the fuel truck and a tap on the same global visa leash that works 9,000 miles from home. Top off, quick walk around. Because I want to be an old pilot and wheels up again. The Great Barrier Reef. Hop 17. I forgot I'd lose 3 time zones between Bali and Cairns, which did my mood no favors. The Gulf of Carpentaria is big water with not much to look at. I groused at the air until approach set me up between the hills. Long runway, easy touchdown, fuel, oil, and a top off on oxygen, because you never know. I booked a reef day trip for morning. The boat filled with vacationers, families, couples, a few solo travelers. One Australian-American family caught my ear, Alex and Helen, and their daughter Karen, a 22-year-old grad student home on break. Most folks planned to snorkel. A few of us would dive. The reef was surreal, fish unafraid, color that seemed saturated beyond reality. I was hovering near the wall, shallow and ready to surface, when a shadow below resolved into a great white. He was low, unhurried, angling up toward the silhouettes on the surface. I surfaced and waved people back in, calm voice, firm words. The crew took it seriously. A fin finally knifed the surface well offshore. Big animal, wrong season to see many here. We shifted sights, then decided to call it. No one complained. Back at the dock there were thank yous and handshakes. Alex insisted on buying dinner. After a clean-up and a power nap, I met them near the esplanade. Cairns in winter is kind. Dry air, a breeze off Trinity Bay. Conversation warmed. Consulate work, travel, the absurdity of airline baggage allowances. Karen kept catching my eye. Bright, self-possessed, funny. At one point she asked, truthfully, how close? Her parents held their breath. Close enough to change the plan, I said. Honesty can be steadier than reassurance when the ocean's involved. After dinner, Alex and Helen peeled off early. Karen asked to walk by the water a while. We talked about coral bleaching and thesis topics and the peculiar way fear lingers after you're safe. At the railing, she slipped her hand into mine. It's a romantic night, she said, hair lifting in the breeze. It is, I agreed. I asked, want to keep talking upstairs? She smiled. Yes. We set boundaries, exchanged ages and expectations, and left the rest off the page. If you want, I can keep rewriting the next hops in the same clean style. Just paste the text you'd like transformed, and I'll convert it to a safe, adult-only, fade to black version while preserving your plot beats, tone, and pacing. Night air over Trinity Bay. I'd suspected she'd been steering us here. I'm not a little girl, she'd said earlier. Steady, self-possessed. I took Karen's hand and led her through the sliding door to the balcony. Warm night air rolled in, heavy with salt and flowers, the bay pricked with boat lights. Romantic night, isn't it? She asked, leaning against the rail. And I get to spend it with a beautiful woman, I said. Kiss me. We did, picking up exactly where we'd left off. Her arms slid around my neck. I felt the tension drop from her shoulders. When we finally came up for air, moonlight pooled on the carpet and caught a teasing smile on her lips. Before anything else, I said, ages and boundaries. 22, she replied, clear as a bell. Mutual, respectful, the other of us can say stop. Deal. We took our time. The curtains breathed with the sea breeze, the room seemed to breathe with them. When the world finally narrowed to just the two of us, I reached to switch off the lamp and let the moment fade to the hush of the bay and the pulse of night. Rabal Hop 18. When I first planned the route, I circled Rabal like a student underlining a first love. The name carried the thunder of the Pacific War. Corsairs and Hellcats, Zeros over the slot, destroyers trading blows in black water. Rabal had been the linchpin, the fortress so formidable the Americans chose to leapfrog it and starve it instead. From the air, the place's heartbreak and history in one view. A broken caldera, ash plains, emerald jungle stitched with old scars. Lacoon AI, the wartime field, was smothered in ash after the 1994 eruption. Tokua is the new concrete where rubber meets runway. I landed there, fueled and hired a cabbie with enough English and a well-worn circuit. We bumped along to what remained of Lacoon AI. Half-buried fuselages lay like bones. Aluminum bleached by sun, seams packed with pumice. The silence did most of the tour guiding. In the hills, we walked into tunnels the Japanese carved by the mile. Cool, damp galleries smelling of rust and soil. A wingless Zero sat in the dark like a shark in a cave. You could almost hear ground crew voices echoing off the rock, planning a sortie that would never come. By evening, I tipped my guide well and checked into the airport hotel. Reruns of imported sitcoms murmured from the TV while I fell asleep thinking about pilots who never made it home and airplanes that did. Guam Hop 19. I launched northwest for Guam, southern anchor of the Marianas, where the Battle of the Philippine Sea turned the map and the Marianas Turkey Shoot turned old aces into legends. From 7,000 feet, the Pacific looked like polished cobalt. Somewhere beneath, wrecks lay in silent formation. About 90 miles out, the altimeter began to sag. I lifted one cup of my headset. The engine note wasn't note, it was absence. Gauges were alive but wrong. Pressure drooped. The prop was windmilling, not biting. Panic scratched at the door. Breathe. Checklist. I cracked the canopy and felt the slap of air. The prop kept turning without power. Not seized. Good. I ran the emergency flow from memory and then from the manual just to be sure. Auxiliary fuel pump ON. Throttle aft to 20 inches. Fuel selector to reserve. Mixture to emergency rich. Leave the pump on. Give the lines time. 7,000 became 6, 5, 4. A cough. A shudder. RPM staggered, sagged, then climbed unevenly like a drunk on stairs. I eased the throttle until the airspeed needle stopped dying and the Corsair's shoulders lifted. I didn't realize my eyes were closed until the engine hiccuped and I snapped them open. Keep turning, keep burning, I told the crankcase, which is a ridiculous prayer and all I had. I called it in. Agana control, inbound flight declaring an emergency. Engine cut. Restart is unstable. State position, came the calm reply. 80 miles southeast. Roger, Squawk LTM, 421, Coast Guard notified. Estimate arrival 21 minutes. Report engine status every 5. I set the code, watched the scope of ocean below and listened to the motor argue with itself. The minutes were long. At 60 miles, the cough spaced out. At 40, the needle behaved like it remembered what a steady line looks like. I kept a hand on the mixture and one eye on the options. If the music stopped, I had a raft, a beacon, and gull wings that wanted to play skis. The Corsair and I made a bargain in that blue. I'd do nothing sudden, she'd do nothing terminal. Coastline rose. Runway numbers widened. Agana gave me a straight in, cleared the pattern, and put a crash truck on the shoulder. The mains kissed asphalt so gently it felt like forgiveness, and I rolled out with a shaking I blamed on the crosswind. On the ramp, the engine ticked as it cooled, small metal sounds, like a watch remembering how to count. Running rough, but the RPMs are staying up, I radioed. I held 7,000 feet, nursing the throttle. Every so often a cylinder barked, a single ragged note in an otherwise stubborn melody. The old airframe felt like what it was built to be, something that could take a hit and keep flying. At 20 miles out, Agana vectored me for a straight in. I rode the high side of the glide, unwilling to waste energy I might need if the engine quit again. I refused to drop flaps or gear until the runway filled the windscreen. An emergency truck waited at midfield. Not exactly soothing. Gear down, flaps to 30. The engine coughed twice, caught, and I crossed the numbers. Mains kissed pavement. If the motor wanted to die, now would be an acceptable time. I cleared the active and asked for GA parking. 10 seconds later, the engine backfired, belched black smoke, and quit for good. An emergency tech rolled up. "You okay?" "I will be, if you help me push." We muscled the Corsair into a slot, and I thanked every deity available that the quitting had waited for asphalt instead of ocean. While I was unloading, an older man approached with 2 younger techs in tow. He studied the airplane, then me. He asked about the trip, the last inspection, the hours since overhaul. When I said, about 100, he frowned like a teacher hearing the wrong answer. One of the younger guys stepped in. "This is Mr. Robert Legaspi, head of maintenance here. He's been working on aircraft since World War II. "Oh," I said, recalibrating. In minutes, panels were off and oil was draining. He patted the cowling with something like affection. One apprentice said, "He always tells us this was the best fighter of the war." Legaspi finally looked over. "So what happened?" "The engine quit," I said, still keyed up. He shook his head. "Good airplane. Engines don't just quit." "They do when you're over deep water," I muttered, then explained the windmilling prop, the emergency pump, the restart. He nodded once. "Air in the fuel lines. Seen it. Maybe sucked some from drop tanks." He barked instructions in quick bursts. Hoses came loose. Fittings were checked. Turning back to me, "We'll pressure test the lines, look for a leak. Might take until tomorrow." Relief washed through me. "Thank you," I said, meaning it. "Good for these boys to work on a real machine," he said. "I worked on these and B-29S." "B-29S?" "They sent me to Tinian. Good pay. I even rode along once." "A check flight." He smiled. "A night raid." I let that sit. "I appreciate the help, Mr. Legaspi." He waved me off and went back to the engine bay, voice low and certain, the kind of tone that makes metal behave. I grabbed a room at the airport hotel and tried to rinse off the adrenaline with something tropical and too sweet. It didn't work, and I didn't sleep much. He called late. After 100 hours and an in-flight event, he wanted the engine opened up. At least 2 days. Fine by me. Guam isn't crowded with must-see attractions unless your list includes sun, shopping, golf, and people watching. I made do. On the 3rd afternoon, he rang again. "Your bird is ready." At dawn, I was on the ramp. The Corsair looked composed, as if last night's drama had happened to someone else. Legaspi emerged from the office, compact and purposeful. "She all right?" I called. "She's fine," he answered. "I think you got bad fuel." "Where from?" "Tokua." He tutted. "Maybe vapor, maybe contamination." We drained the entire system, pulled cylinders to inspect. No damage. Replaced one magneto, topped everything. "She'll fly like she should." He handed me the bill. 600 gallons of fuel, 6 quarts of oil, 16 hours of labor, 1 mag. The total was charitable. "I think this is too low," I said. He laughed. "I can't charge full freight while they learn. Working on this, good experience. You pay, we're square." It was effectively a thorough 100-hour service at half price, which felt like a benediction before more ocean. Manila, the other side of the world, hop 20. I thanked him a dozen times, ran a final weather check, and launched west. The stretch to Manila is long, nearly 6 hours of horizon, so I set max endurance and settled in. The air at altitude was cool, even near the equator. Nearing Luzon, mountains rose out of the sea like a slow-motion trick. If anyone doubts the world is round, let them watch land lift itself out of blue. Descending across Manila Bay, I could see Corregidor and the Bataan Peninsula, the last American-Filipino redoubt in 1942. The Japanese had budgeted 2 months for Luzon. Defenders made it 5. Those lost months warped the enemy timetable and arguably helped set up the first major checks against Japanese expansion. Sacrifice has a way of rippling. That night I took a car to Olongapo, Po City to sailors, a place as infamous for bars as for stories told about them. Without a carrier in port, the streets were quiet, and with the noise stripped away, the grit was harder to ignore. A few hostesses tried to tempt me into a drink and a tab. The whole scene felt tired and sad. I headed back early and took a long shower to clear the air from my head. I arrived at the airport before sunrise for the hop to Taipei and walked straight into a semicircle of police. Papers were demanded. I handed them over. In careful English, the officer informed me I was under arrest. "In your plane," the captain said later in his office, "my men found narcotics." "That's impossible," I said. "Possible," he corrected mildly. "Penalties are severe." He let that hang, then added, "Of course we will notify your embassy before trial." His shrug did the rest. It took a minute to understand I was being shaken down. "I'll write you a check," I said, thinking of bail. He lifted a palm. "A wire. 10,000. In the morning when your banks are awake." He checked his watch. "East Coast or West?" He had the choreography down. They parked me in a room for the night. No cuffs, no bruises, just a locked door and a clock. I arranged a transfer to my hotel, not to him, with a one-time password only I knew. The captain released me to house arrest, pointedly noting that my airplane was guarded. The next morning the wire cleared. He was waiting in the hotel restaurant, all smiles. I handed him the envelope. He didn't bother to open it. "Please," he said, standing, "come again to the Philippines." I kept my reply behind my teeth, checked out, and went straight to the field. The guards were gone. I climbed in, fired up, and taxied for departure. I didn't even file a plan until I was feet wet. Author's note: it sounds like a tall tale until it isn't. Years ago, I helped a client wire funds to a foreign police chief to end a similar farce. The moment the money arrived, so did freedom. Other countries, other rules. Eyes open. Taipei. Hop 21. The hop north from Manila to Taipei was calm, coastline sliding past the wing, a scatter of islands, so I was rarely without land in sight. Taipei sits like a crown at the top of Taiwan. Glass, steel, and a river stitched with bridges. First order of business after landing and checking into a hotel: call the bank on the 24-hour number. They confirmed someone tried to reuse yesterday's password to push a wire. Blocked. I thanked the night shift angel who caught it, then set a fresh one-time code, told them it's valid for a single transfer and only to Russia, just in case a diversion ever put me on the wrong apron along that coastline. With that paranoia squared away, the anger about Manila dulled. 10 grand stung, but I was burning through 5 tanks of avgas per long stretch anyway. Numbers helped, if not much. Wandering the city, I found a family spot down an alley. No English, no Mandarin on my end. Just the universal mime: "For your best dishes, please," plus a beer. Plates arrived in a parade of steam and vinegar and chilies. Problem solved. Osaka cherry blossoms. Hop 22. I tracked northwest up the Ryukyu chain, each island a green bead on blue thread. Somewhere below, the same air lanes had once been crowded with F-4US and Hellcats. A Marine named Klingman famously lost his guns to frozen lube over Okinawa, then lopped a Japanese fighter's tail with his prop and still landed, missing 5 inches off each blade. The Corsair's reputation for stubborn survival wasn't myth. Over Iwo Jima's cinder and Okinawa's reefs, the bent wingbird earned a second name: Whistling Death, rockets and bombs saving grunts who'd run out of road. I saluted the black sand beaches as they slid under my wing. Some gestures are corny because they're true. I crossed Kyushu and the inland sea, then dropped into Osaka, old imperial bones wrapped in modern muscle. I'd always wanted to see the city after reading Clavel, but my research these days ran more to history than headlines. I met an interpreter, Aiko, mid-20s, sharp suit, quicker smile, through a licensed guide service. We walked castle grounds under late blossoms and traded notes. I asked about post-war aviation museums. She pointed me to a neighborhood jazz bar where American pilots once drank with local musicians. That evening we sat at the bar while a trio worked through a standard. We talked work, books, the way Osaka and Tokyo tease each other, and the fact that cherry blossoms are beautiful partly because they don't last. When the set ended, we stepped into cool air off the river and said goodnight. If there was a spark, it could take its time. Back in the room, I marked up tomorrow's route and wondered whether this particular Corsair had flown the day Yamato went down. 8 bombs, 13 torpedoes. A battleship designed to be unsinkable finally rolling and erupting. Air power had ended the battleship era in an afternoon. I clicked off the lamp and let the engine's steady hum replay in my head until sleep found me. Osaka. Compensated dating. I can't, she said quietly, the words arriving like a careful bow. Please, take it anyway, I answered, keeping a respectful distance. I'd really value your time explaining Enjo Ko's AI. And I think you're extraordinary. The money is for your time, whether you stay or go. She watched me for a beat, weighing tone as much as words. I may keep this if I leave? I nodded once, palms open to show I had no intention of cornering her. She looked down at the small envelope as if it might speak, then slipped it into her purse and rose halfway, a motion that could become either farewell or a reset. I stood too and offered a brief bow. She returned it. Then, surprising us both, set her purse back on the side table. Do you think I am beautiful? She asked. The question wasn't fishing, it was reconnaissance. Testing safety, intent, truth. Oh yes, I said, because to understate would be dishonest. She breathed, as though releasing a rehearsal she'd been carrying all day. My name is Eiko. I am 24. I can correct misunderstandings. People say many things about Enjo Kek's AI. Many are wrong. If you're willing to talk, I'm ready to listen, I said. And the money is still yours either way. Her shoulders leveled. Then we talk. She glanced toward the balcony. May we sit where there is air? We stepped outside. The night leaned warm over Osaka, softer than Tokyo, busier than a village, neon mapping the river in broken stripes. I poured tea from the room's small set, and we balanced cups on the rail. For a while she spoke like a guide walking me through a museum everyone thinks they visited. People say it is always one thing, she said, choosing each English word with care. But it is many arrangements. Sometimes only dinner, sometimes talking, sometimes more. The rule is, who decides? Always both. If any person feels pushed, it is not Enjo Ko's AI. Then it is wrong. I appreciate you saying that out loud, I said. She gave a small nod that meant, thank you for hearing me. The talk widened. Work. Her grandmother's tea canister, the way reputations travel faster than facts. She told me about expectations that lived inside uniforms, how a blazer and pleated skirt become a magnet for stories that ignore birthdays and reality. Some people like the idea of schoolgirl, she said, rolling her eyes, but it is only costume in their heads. Real life is graduation, jobs, rent. I'm sorry for the parts the stories get wrong, I said. For what it's worth, I won't add to that. Thank you, she said, softer now. We retreated inside when the tea cooled. The room smelled faintly of cedar and starch. Aiko slipped off her shoes and tucked her feet beneath her on the couch, the posture of someone deciding to stay. She asked about flying. I told her about the first time I crossed a cold front and how the world sharpened after the turbulence, as if the windshield itself had been rinsed. I did my best not to wrap the sky in poetry, but some metaphors impose themselves. Do pilots feel lonely? She asked. Sometimes, I admitted. There's plenty of quiet at 7,000 feet. The radios fill some of it. Then landings add their own drama, and afterwards you're just a person with too much adrenaline and not enough conversation. She watched the city for a while, thumb idling on the rim of her teacup. I did not plan to stay, she said finally. But you have been respectful. If I decide to kiss you, you will ask again before anything more. Every time, I said, and no will always be a complete sentence. She smiled with relief as if we had solved the problem of aviation fuel instead of boundaries. Then I would like to kiss you. We met in the middle of the room. I asked. She said yes, and we found that first careful kiss. Less a collision than an alignment. Her hand settled over mine at her waist, steadying us both. We stayed there, talking between kisses, stopping often to make sure our yesies were still yesies. Time slowed into a quieter, comfortable shape. When trust felt as natural as the air around us, we let the door close on the rest of the evening. What followed is private. Two consenting adults, unhurried and mutually choosing each step. No scripts, no performative myths, just the warmth that arrives when people listen well. Later, I woke to the hush of the AC and a folded note by the tea tray in neat, careful handwriting. "Thank you for being gentle, A." I slid it into my logbook beside today's headings and airspeeds. In the margin, I wrote what I wouldn't say aloud to anyone else. Sometimes the kindest thing in a city of 10 million is to be asked and to be believed when you answer. Morning found us with miso soup and quiet laughter. At the door, she touched my elbow. "Promise me you will eat proper breakfast before flying," she said. "Copy that," I told her. "Pilot's honor." We bowed. She disappeared into the elevator's mirrored hush, and the room felt briefly like an afterimage of a lantern. Warm, then gone, the shape still present in the mind. I left for the airport with a lighter bag and a heavier sense of responsibility, which is not a bad trade for a traveler. Naka shibetsu, garden bath and paper cranes. The inn looked older than my country. Shoji doors, tatami floors, cedar beams that made the air smell like arithmetic wood smoke and rain. The innkeeper walked me through the small inner garden where steam rose from a stone bath, the water reflecting maple leaves as if the season had been poured onto the surface. "Ofuro," she said. "Please wash first, then soak. No rush." At the washing station, I fumbled with the etiquette. Sit, rinse, soap, rinse again. Respect the quiet. A staff member patted in on soft sandals and bowed. Michiko, the name stitched in tiny kanji on her sleeve. She looked mid-20s, maybe younger at first glance, but her posture had the easy confidence of someone who'd given these instructions 1,000 times. "May I help with the order?" she asked in careful English. "I'd appreciate it," I said. No fuss, no awkwardness, just the choreography of a culture that treats bathing like a conversation with the day. She showed me where to place the wooden pail, how to rinse away the soap so that the bath remains communal, not cloudy, how to move slowly so steam and breath have time to coordinate. It felt like unlearning and remembering at once. "You travel alone?" she asked. "Usually," I said. "The plane's loud enough for two." She laughed. A small bell. "I like that. Loud enough for two." The bath itself was the temperature of an argument you're glad to lose. I eased in until the heat became a room of its own. The garden leaned close. Somewhere beyond the wall, a bicycle bell chimed. Somewhere nearer, the water made a sound like someone whispering advice. When I rose, Michiko offered a towel with a practiced bow and a kind of professional distance that felt like a gift of space. Back in the room, she arrived again with tea. Sencha, so green it looked like a color invented that morning, and set the tray near the window. "You will sleep well after Ofuro," she said. "But first, stories. I think you have some." We sat cross-legged on tatami with cups warming our hands and traded information the way strangers do when they decide to stop being strangers. She told me about winters in Hokkaido, how snow could be both weather and architecture. I tried to explain the hush inside a headset when the tower goes quiet, and you're the only voice for 100 miles. The quiet in the room changed. Not the absence of sound, but the presence of attention. She asked about the Corsair. I told her about the gull wings and the kind of resilience that gets stories written about it. "Old planes," I said, "teach you the difference between superstition and maintenance." "People also," she said, amused. "If you listen." We laughed. Tea refilled itself. The night deepened its blue. "Would you like to stay a little longer?" I asked after a while, not as a code for anything beyond itself. She thought, then nodded. "Yes. I am off duty now." A small pause. "I am 23. I should say this, I think, because sometimes guests guess wrong." "Thank you," I said. "I'm glad you told me." Conversation makes a different sound after facts like that, lighter and truer. We let it shift. She taught me 3 new words and corrected 2 old ones I'd been saying with the confidence of a bad tourist. She asked how it feels to cross the equator in the air. Like your compass has been secretly reading another book all along, I said, then suddenly switches back. Eventually, the stillness became a bridge rather than a wall. I asked if I could take her hand. She said yes. We stayed there, fingers threaded, listening to rain start somewhere we couldn't see. May I sit closer? I asked. Another yes. The room shrank to the circle of 2 people deciding carefully. I kissed her cheek, and then we let the rest of the night move forward privately. No details that belonged to anyone else. No choreography except mutual permission. 2 adults, present and unhurried. The lamp dimmed. The garden outside hummed the soft syllables of water and wind. Morning returned us to tea and clear air. Michiko folded a small paper crane from the inn's stationery, crisp edges becoming intention. For calm air, she said, pressing it into my palm. And for engines that behave. I'll keep it in my flight bag, I promised. At the door she bowed the way you bow when you're saying thank you for more than politeness permits you to name. I bowed the way you bow when you've been given a kindness. I tucked the crane beside my checklist. Mixture, prop, gear. And felt a ridiculous surge of confidence, like I'd installed a second altimeter. Back at the northern airfield, 2 ground crew arrived as if they'd heard the engine clear its throat from the highway. The older one was already smiling at the gull wings. Corsair, he said in English, the word pronounced as a memory. I returned the smile and the nod. When the pump chugged to a stop, he glanced up at the fuel total and shook his head, the universal language of pilots everywhere. I handed over my card. He waved the portable reader like a magician's flourish. Small world, big tanks. Hotel? I asked, miming sleep. They conferred, then loaded me in the work truck as if I were cargo they were pleased to smuggle into their town. At the inn door, I thanked them with the deepest bow I could attempt without falling over. They laughed, pleased enough with the effort to consider it a success. That night, the paper crane watched from the edge of the lamp as I filled in the logbook. Naka Shibetsu. Fuel, weather kavok, runway long enough to forgive a mediocre flare. Below that I wrote what I'd learned twice in 2 cities. Hospitality is just logistics until someone adds care. Then it becomes a kind of flight plan you carry inside your ribs. I slept the way people sleep when the bath was hot, the tea was good, and the day made more sense at the end than it did at the beginning. In the morning, I packed the crane, checked the winds aloft, and felt, against all odds, well rested enough to trust both. Arctic weather. Hop 24. Leaving Japan, I had one workable path to Adak, overfly a slice of Russia, then hop the Aleutians. The range math was ugly. Adak sat 1,606 nautical miles from Naka Shibetsu, technically beyond my 600 nmm ferry range. On paper, I'd hit reserve 16 seconds too late at normal cruise. In practice, if I topped every tank to the rivets, flew max endurance, and leaned the mixture with love, I could make it with a real reserve. I tested a 1600m cross-country before the trip, and still had fuel to spare. Also, Adak isn't exactly Atlanta. I wasn't going to hold for an hour in a landing queue. First, permissions. I wrestled with the Russian consulate's paperwork until I finally took a vice consul to a fancy dinner in San Francisco. A week later, the overflight was approved, as if good Bordeaux improves airspace. I launched early. Forecast. Fog burning off by 10, returning in the evening. Acceptable. Climb out. Japan fell behind quickly. The first Russian island slid under the nose, territory swapped at the end of the war. I followed the chain north, then turned into the blank loneliness of the North Pacific. That water kills in minutes. I didn't intend to meet it on its own terms. Somewhere near Vladivostok, 2 fighters formed up. Red stars on the tails. MiG-29S or Su-27S, hard to tell at that angle. They flew 1 per side, flaps drooped to match my crawl. I waved. One pilot returned it, casual as a neighbor checking a fence line. 2 minutes later, the flaps tucked up, burners bloomed, and they were gone. Curiosity satisfied. 2 hours from Adak, the weather briefer's optimism died. Adak went from clearing to 0-0 in a blink. Tower recommended Atu and handed me to Coast Guard control there, who, sensibly, told me to turn back. A few panicked explanations later, Everyone understood the problem. I didn't have the legs to return to Japan. WW2's single 5,800-foot runway is Coast Guard owned and generally closed to random visitors, birding charters accepted. But my original track almost overflew it, and the fog ceiling still sat at 500 feet. Hairy, but workable. I shot the arrival and landed. Unauthorized, yes, also absolutely within emergency regs. The base turned out in force. The Corsair drew them like a magnet. Within an hour, I was hustled to the dining/recreation hall and treated like a novelty that talked. Remote duty gets dull. A visitor is news. The chief found me a spare bunk. Day 2, the world went white. 20 feet of visibility at best. Typical WW2, the chief said, not unkindly. By afternoon, the ceiling teased higher, but too late to depart. I set a new personal best for old movies and lies told as sea stories, then lost impressively at cards. I promised to mail a check. I needed pocket cash to leave. Day 3, early wake-up, coffee, and a weather check. Anchorage was crystal, 60 degrees and blue. Between WW2 and mainland, though, a carpet of fog and marine stratus stretched unbroken, topping near 3,500. I'd be cruising above it, comforting for the engine, less so for the nerves. The fog lowered while I prepped the airplane. By run-up, the ceiling was flirting with 100 feet. No traffic to worry about. Just time. I shoved the throttle forward and went. Wheels up, and the world became a graphite smear. I left the blower in high and held military power while the Corsair clawed for light. At 3,600, we punched through into pain-bright sun. 5 minutes later, I set blower to neutral, pulled to max cruise, and clicked the mixture to auto lean. Below, a solid white eternity, occasional Aleutian peaks pushing through like islands in an iced sea. In the war years, this leg would have been dead reckoning and hope. Now GPS kept me laser straight, cloud or no cloud. To pass the time, I played small games. Pin the course needle dead center, track miles down versus miles to go, calculate landfall percentages. It was water, water everywhere, rewritten as clouds, clouds everywhere. And I was the only punctuation mark. Anchorage. Hop 25. Landfall came as a blur of green. The coast opened into a broad alluvial plain, stitched by rivers running out of snowy teeth. Anchorage sits at the top of Cook Inlet, with Elmendorf AFB close enough to make a wrong turn a headline. I filed IFR for the arrival, let the controller earn his paycheck and keep my tail clear of the wrong concrete. On deck, I secured the airplane and grabbed a taxi. The hotel sat near a wildlife park and, conveniently, a bike rental. I took a trail out of town, brain idle and legs turning, when I coasted around a bend and nearly rode into a wall with legs. Moose are not cartoons. This one was the size of a disagreement with gravity. We locked eyes. I pedaled backwards a few yards like I was rewinding a tape, slipped behind the curve of the trail, and then accelerated with the quiet dignity of a person who prefers being untrampled. Later I realized he'd been standing inches from a busy path, accepting joggers and cyclists as just more local fauna. But at the time, all I could picture was a charge. I don't speak moose. I returned the bike and chose the civilized version of nature, art galleries. Moose are majestic in oil and pastel. For dinner, I discovered the northern problem of summer daylight. The sun still high when my watch confessed it was 10 p.m. I had a long leg in the morning. So I saluted the persistent sun, retreated to the hotel, and set an early alarm. Tomorrow would be fuel numbers, winds aloft, and the first steps back toward home. Broken clouds. Hop 26. Daylight was already sharp at 5 a.m. I grabbed a quick bite and had the Corsair ready before 6. Juno's report showed a low overcast with an 800-foot ceiling. Perfectly fine for airliners, and workable for me on instruments. Forecast said it wouldn't deteriorate. If it did, I had the fuel to turn back to Anchorage. I launched. The route hugged the coast. Once at altitude, the mountains rose out of the sea like something painted, 20,000 foot walls laced with glaciers, too grand to feel real. Over Glacier Bay, I watched ice calve into blue water. Then, just south, the coastal fog appeared, a white sheet drawn from the mountains out across the ocean. In a small airplane, clouds aren't scenery, they're structure and risk. Airliners can top most weather, we can't. And everyone respects thunderstorms. A former F-4 pilot I knew took a lightning strike that sheared a foot off his tail, Cooked every electrical box and nearly ended him. In Spain there's a bomb range in a valley between ridges. 2 jets entered the clouds for a turn. Lead rolled right wingman. Probably disoriented. Rolled left. He hit the mountain at 500 knots. Clouds hide the hard edges. I was IFR and handed to Juno approach at 5,000 feet, down in the milk with water beating on the windscreen. I'd flown scores of approaches under the hood for my rating, but this was different. No instructor, unfamiliar field, terrain on both sides. I glued my eyes to the needles and rode the glide path like a rail. Morbid consolation. If ATC vectored me into granite at 250 knots, I wouldn't have long to worry about it. At 900 feet, gray thinned. At 800, I broke out. Runway straight ahead, hills bracketing the valley, the city off the left side. It looked beautiful. Gear down, flaps set, a whisper of power. I preferred to land a touch long rather than flirt with the threshold. A small bounce, then a rollout good enough by the only standard that matters. I could walk away. Taxi in, call for avgas, check the next leg. Sacramento. Clear and forecast to stay that way. The plan said overnight in Juneau. The pilot said keep going. I'd already done a 2-hop day in Australia, and this was home air. The idea of sleeping in my own bed turned the dial. I convinced myself, truthfully, that I had the fuel, the daylight, and the weather. The truck topped every tank. I filed, briefed, and pointed south. Home. Hop 27. I was climbing back through the fog 40 minutes later. On top, the world flattened into 2 colors. Mountains off the left wing, a white blanket right and ahead. Boring flying. Hold heading, monitor power. Let the coastline be your compass. With no horizon, the instruments are everything. In cloud, it's easy to drift, easier to tighten into a bank you don't feel. Plenty of pilots have spiraled down that way. JFK Jr. rode an invisible turn right into the ocean. Canada slid beneath me again. I started counting countries touched or overflown on this trip and lost track. Canada, Greenland, Iceland, Ireland, England, Spain, France, Italy. I'd tally it properly later. The fog began to fray, green showing through. By Victoria, the sky had opened. Vancouver and Victoria both gleamed, postcard cities split by water. I promised myself I'd come back up here on a quieter trip. The promise was tempting enough to make me consider a left turn and a stop, but the pull of home was louder. I stayed with the plan. My line kept me offshore for a while, then I crossed the Oregon coast and tracked over the southwest corner of the state. Now I was back in my neighborhood. I fly to Ashland a few times a year. The Oregon Shakespeare Festival can go toe-to-toe with Broadway and win more often than you'd think. If you want great theater in a gorgeous setting, go. Familiar landmarks took over. Mount Shasta loomed ahead, a 14,000-foot monolith yanked straight from the valley floor. People talk about crystal energy and moonlit dances there. Standing under that much mountain, you understand why myths accumulate. The terrain flattened into the Central Valley, a green runway that runs for 600 miles. The GPS said less than an hour to home. My mind drifted through the trip's roll call. Lilja and what to do next. Terror and relief over the Indian Ocean, the crush of India and its girls. My mistake and lucky landing in Thailand. Karen in Australia and her hero's reward. The mid-Pacific flameout. The shakedown in the Philippines. The complicated encounters in Japan. Good and bad, it was a life stuffed into weeks. I jogged east to stay clear of Sacramento's Bravo, then descended toward the same strip I'd lifted off from more than a month ago. On final, I could see my house off the left wing. I gave it a wave in my head. The mains chirped. The tail settled. And the relief came on like warmth. I'd done it. I taxied to my hangar, set the brake, and cracked the canopy. Before the engine ticks had fully faded, I opened the logbook. 119 hours, 26 minutes, and 27,185 nautical miles. Then I closed it and let the quiet say the rest. Afterthoughts. A month after I got home, a letter arrived from Iceland. My hands shook opening it. Lilja wrote to say she'd met a nice man. She thanked me for her first ride in a plane and said she'd always remember me, but her boyfriend was the jealous sort, so maybe I shouldn't write. It was a sunny, gracious note, and it flattened me. I'd always suspected she was far too dazzling for a guy like me. Like the man says, it's lovely to admire a Maserati, but at night you climb into your Pontiac and drive home. Lilja was a Maserati. So much for long-distance love. I toured the air shows with the Corsair, always a headliner, and I was a minor celebrity after the round-the-world flight. At Oshkosh the next year, a man studied the gun ports with a pencil flashlight, then crouched to examine the belly. He seemed a little too interested. "Hello," I said. He straightened. "Hello, Roger Smythe Hyde," he said in a crisp British accent, offering his hand. "I'm with Janes." For the uninitiated, Janes publishes the Bibles on the world's armies, navies, air forces. My antenna went up. "How can I help you?" He glanced at the cockpit art, at the 4 pirate emblems, unusual markings. "I'm a Tampa Bay fan," I said. He blinked. "Football. American football." A thin smile. "Yes, well, there's a rather curious story doing the rounds in a very small circle. An old WW2 Corsair somewhere over the Somali coast last year allegedly chanced upon pirates attacking a vessel. Low on fuel, the pilot supposedly made an emergency recovery aboard the Kitty Hawk. An admiral, so the toll goes, talked him into helping out. They fitted GBUs to his aircraft and he sank 3 pirate boats. Pirates took a beating last year by all accounts." He looked again at the pirate emblems. The pilot was nicknamed the Lone Ranger. His gaze slid to the cowl script, Lone Ranger, for flying solo. "Never heard it," I said. "And your story has holes. This airframe can't carry modern ordnance, let alone guide it. It doesn't have the electronics to arm one. Shapes and racks don't match either." I tapped the wings. All the hardpoints were removed. Maybe you could hang a museum piece bomb, but who'd be crazy enough to fly unstable relics? "Yes, there are issues," he said mildly. "But you do have functional guns. If I were to publish, if you print my name, you'll be defending a libel case in Britain. My understanding is your laws are stricter than ours. Unless you can prove this Corsair can drop a GBU, bring a very good solicitor." He studied the underside again and sighed. "Some would call you a hero." "For what? I haven't done anything." He waited for a tell I didn't give him. "I do hate unanswered questions," he said at last. "It's a fine story." He nodded at the pirate art. "Good day," and walked off. The limey bastard must have talked, because for the next 2 days people drifted over to stare at the pirate emblems and the Lone Ranger. Folks on the circuit treated me differently. Nothing said out loud, but something was in the air. Everywhere I went, a knot of insiders would study the markings, then look me over like they were measuring a rumor. I had trouble buying a beer, not a hardship. Only twice did anyone ask me straight out. I denied it both times. Lately I've been thinking about another lap around the planet. Plenty I missed. Now I know where not to stop. This time I'm tempted by the southern route. The Atlantic hop from Brazil to Sierra Leone is 1,581 miles. Plenty of Allied ferries made that leg to North Africa and Italy. On the way down, I could see Inca ruins, pop over the Andes, skim the Amazon, then cut across Africa. I'd skip the Philippines, thanks. As for Iceland, I'm not sure I'm avoiding it, but the thought of that stop twists something in me. Maybe I just don't want the northern route again. There's a world full of beautiful cities and beautiful women. I'd like to see them all.